For all of Edgar Allan Poe's literary genius, his greatest claim to fame, in my mind at least, is as credited co-writer of the first Simpsons Halloween episode.
He's called the Raven.
And here in Richmond, Virginia, people love Edgar Allan Poe. You can get a drink at Poe's Pub, visit the grave of Poe's mother, and see countless artifacts from the writer's early life in Richmond at the Poe Museum.
We think it's kind of one of the best adaptations, especially for students.
Of all the iconic Simpsons Halloween segments, though, the Raven adaptation often gets overlooked as a relatively dry, straightforward affair. But I would argue it's not only one of the most well-crafted and unique sequences in Simpsons history, it also, inadvertently, taps into several recurring themes that the show would continue to explore in the decades to come.
Last week, not kidding, I was managing the front desk and I overheard a conversation of a visitor saying, "Oh, eat my shorts, I remember this episode."
The idea for Treehouse of Horror came directly from show creator Matt Groening for the series' second season. They wanted to do a parody of an old horror comics publisher known as EC Comics, including old comic series like Vault of Horror and Weird Science. But this was a major departure. Throughout the development and first season of The Simpsons, Groening and head writer Sam Simon worked hard to keep the show from becoming too cartoony. They wanted the show, despite its wacky character designs, to be grounded in a solid family reality. So Sam Simon, understandably, wasn't sure about this high-concept, out-of-this-world horror and sci-fi parody. But, according to one of the episode's several co-writers, Simon was captivated by one idea: a faithful adaptation of The Raven. The idea of depicting such a high-minded tale among other non-canon stories of ghosts and aliens is part of what helped Simon get on board with the Treehouse of Horror premise at all. And such highbrow source material could help them defy the perception at the time that the show was crass, mindless entertainment. But the Raven idea wasn't particularly popular among the other writers.
I was so frightened that this was going to be the worst, most pretentious thing that we'd ever done. I was like, oh no, where are the gags?
It's a gothic poem from 1845 about a man grappling with the death of his lost love, haunted by unending grief represented by a raven who only says nevermore. You can see why the other writers were skeptical. Since it was his baby, the segment is credited to Simon, alongside Poe.
Once upon a midnight dreary,
while I pondered weak and weary.
It's a remarkably faithful adaptation, just the story of the poem illustrated on screen, with a few cute Simpson-y flourishes here and there. Although, partway through production, some of the writers were worried that it needed a little pep to keep audiences interested, so late in the game they added a few instances of Bart interrupting the story,
Quoth the Raven.
Eat my shorts. Bart, stop it!
which appear to use recycled animation from elsewhere in the episode.
He says nevermore, and that's all he'll ever say. Okay. Don't worry, Bart, you won't learn anything.
But the segment's real strengths aren't in the jokes, but in its very earnest, artful retelling of the poem.
It remains faithful to the original text, and I think that's a good example that you don't need to modernize text for it to become relatable.
Early Simpsons seasons get a bad rap for the relatively rough animation, but Season 2 truly does have some impressive animation if you can get past the relatively low budget, and this episode in particular is an absolute visual tour de force. Director David Silverman clearly had a field day on The Raven.
Bart, as the Raven says nevermore, Homer screams, "Ah!"
The dreamy atmosphere underscoring Homer's terror is masterfully done, and the wild, dramatic camera angles give this segment an energy unlike any other Treehouse of Horror. But in addition to the animation, Dan Castellaneta's earnest, all-or-nothing voice acting really puts the segment over the top.
Rich!
I cried.
Thy God hath led thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore.
And of course,
James Earl Jones does a voice, and he sounds like this.
December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor.
James Earl Jones, I think that's how the poem should be read. Very perfect. I think that's how Edgar Allan Poe would intend it to be read.
this episode was also the first one to be scored by longtime composer Alf Clausen. In its first year, the show jumped around to different composers trying to find the right fit, but with the score to this episode, Clausen proved himself to be the perfect person for the job.
We don't look upon our show as being a cartoon, but we look upon it as being a drama where the characters are drawn.
I strongly recommend looking up the full Raven score on YouTube. It's truly a beautiful, epic piece of music. So with all that going for it, how was the episode received? Well, at least one review at the time found the Raven segment hilarious, but another somehow found that the adaptation wasn't faithful enough. Nowadays, Simpsons fans are pretty split. Some find it too lacking in humor. Others, like me, delight in the fact that the show is bold enough to try something so different. In retrospect, though, one of my favorite things about this segment is how well the themes of the poem blend with the themes of the actual show.
The ones that come to mind is loss. So kind of loss and death, dealing with grief.
What does that have to do with The Simpsons? Well, lots. That is, if we psychoanalyze Homer to try and figure out why exactly he gets so freaked out after hearing Lisa read this gothic poem about loss. If we assume that the segment is Homer's imagination, we see that Homer pictures Marge in the role of the lost love Lenore. And he has every reason to be fearful of, well, losing Marge, given that his antics have already given her reason to ponder leaving him. His imagining of Bart as this ever-present reminder of loss also makes some sense, given the oft-explored theme of lost opportunities for both Homer and Marge after having kids.
I have 3 kids and no money. Why can't I have no kids and 3 money?
And while I think these feelings of loss could be swirling around in Homer's subconscious while hearing Lisa read this poem, I want to go one step further and see what Homer has in common with Edgar Allan Poe. Poe's life was haunted by loss. His wife Virginia died at the age of 24 from tuberculosis, so it stands to reason that he'd be writing a poem like this based on his own feelings of grief. But while she did suffer a long illness before dying, she actually perished after Poe wrote The Raven. So who else could he have been grieving when he wrote this, and countless other poems about the death of a woman? Well, maybe his mother, who died in Richmond when Poe was a child. And as we would frequently see in future episodes, Homer's life is haunted by one great tragic loss in his childhood, the loss of his mother Mona, who disappeared when he was a kid. And even once he learned that she was still alive as an adult, she was repeatedly taken away from him due to her trouble with the law.
If you stay here, you'll be abandoning your family the way I abandoned you.
Yeah, that did mess me up pretty bad.
Before eventually dying in season 19.
Mom?
Could being haunted by this profound loss throughout his life be the real reason Homer is so upset by this poem? Well, of course I know that Sam Simon wasn't thinking about this when he decided to adapt The Raven. I do think the connection to Homer's life as it was eventually fleshed out elevates this already brilliant segment even further. There's ultimately a surprising character richness to Homer's role in this poem.
Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe and forget this lost Lenore.
Quoth the Raven.
Nevermore.
However you interpret the segment though, it definitely accomplished one thing. It served as a gateway for a lot of people to get into the works of Edgar Allan Poe, as the folks at the Poe Museum can confirm. They even have a program at the museum that uses this episode to teach kids about Poe and his influence on pop culture.
Even if a kid may not understand what the poem is saying, it can understand through that kind of relatable imagery.
And the more you learn about Poe, the more you start to see his fingerprints all over popular culture, which in turn influenced The Simpsons.
It's the beating of that hideous heart!
He essentially invented the modern detective story.
He directly influenced Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who's the author of the Sherlock Holmes series.
And even dabbled in formative works of science fiction.
He was super involved in science fiction as well, which is another aspect of Poe that people don't realize. If you're a fan of 2001, A Space Odyssey, Star Wars, Star Trek, Poe influenced it.
Even in that Simpsons episode, they also get abducted by aliens.
There you go. So there's Poe influence all around.
I haven't read all of Poe's works, but I'm at least well versed enough to have recognized that one of the 2 in-house cats at the museum was named after Pluto, one of the titular cats in the Poe story, the Black Cat. At one point I even had the Raven fully memorized. Doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, which unfortunately I couldn't do by just watching the episode over and over. Word Lenore, because the episode actually leaves a few stanzas out. And some of the missing stanzas are super good, and I think further illustrate some of my earlier points about the theme of Homer missing his mother, and his long uncertainty about her fate. So to close out this Halloween special, I want to do a reading of one of the final stanzas of the full poem not included in the episode, illustrated with scenes from the show.
Prophet,
said I,
thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by the heaven that bends above us, by the God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore.
Quoth the Raven, nevermore.
One last connection to the theme of loss. After butting heads with Matt Groening for the first few seasons, Sam Simon left the show. Among other things, he became an animal rights advocate, devoting his life to rescuing dogs through the Sam Simon Foundation. He also sponsored a ship that fought against whaling. He died in 2015 from colorectal cancer, but, like his Simpsons co-writer, will always be remembered in part for his association with animals.